Hi, so my name is Andres. I lead the public sector in Nortal. So Nortal is the digital society research and development company, originally from Estonia, where we have built up quite a lot of the digital public services and infrastructure that is powering our society in Estonia. But today, we're a global force driving government digital transformation worldwide. Alistair, thank you for inviting. It's amazing to be here. Lots of amazing conversations here. So I will try to take a more practical spin on how we have approached trust in different parts of the world, but mostly I will be deriving my examples from Estonia. That how were we capable of creating from a relatively low trust society to go towards a high trust society, not more than in a mere decade. And I will try to extract from it a more general approach, which we believe works everywhere, the formula of a sort. And focusing more on the practical side of things, that what works, what really doesn't perhaps move the needle that much. But first things first, I've had a lot of conversations here and elsewhere. And there's one myth that I would immediately want to touch upon. Somehow when we talk about the high trust society in Estonia, then people tend to believe that somehow people in Estonia trust the government more than somewhere else in the world. This is absolutely not true. We are just as paranoid as everybody else. So I cannot speak for all Estonians, but at least there's many in this audience here. I think that everybody feels the same way. People are people. Fundamentally, all of us are similar, regardless of where we are and in what societies we live in. But we do have figured out certain tricks how to increase trust because of the necessity of it, especially considering that the natural instinct for everybody is not to trust. But quick sanity question. Whom would you rather trust? And why? So considering that both of those organizations are doing their job equally well, meaning that rescue service is not like dropping the ball there, but both are doing their jobs well. One is responsible for saving your life. The other, well, takes your money. No catch there. So obviously, rescue board comes first. But the seeming paradox, what we have in Estonia, is that tax comes right after. So tax authority is on top of the list of trust right after the organizations that are literally responsible for saving your life. And not only that, it's also one of the most efficient tax administrations in the world. So they take your data, they take your money, and you comply with a smile on your face. Why? So, turns out that high trust leads to policy effectiveness, and policy effectiveness leads to high trust. So different policy instruments that increase effectiveness, they tend also to increase trust. So the specific mechanism for this is voluntary compliance. So in the tax authority example from earlier, the Estonian tax authority has high trust because they have been able to achieve high effectiveness. And people voluntarily choose to comply. And the research shows that this mechanism, this dynamic, it works everywhere. So anything that increases effectiveness also tends to increase trust. So let's decompose a little bit how that works. But before that, let's analyze a little bit or remind ourselves some of the common basic cognitive biases that are influencing trust in the context of public services. Just a few ones, the ones that are relevant for this. The famous negativity bias. The train might be late a couple of times, but it feels like it always does. Why? Because every negative event has a stronger impact on trust than an equal positive event. So we need to make things reliable in order not to trigger that cognitive bias. Then our sense of fairness is quite easy to hurt. We have a negative experience with something, and we create presumptions that it's always so. For example, a high politician gets caught on avoiding taxes, like there was this Panama scandal, and suddenly we think that politicians are crooks, when actually there is not that much data to suggest that. But we tend to create that presumption. Then we tend to distrust things that we cannot really experience that well ourselves. So if we wouldn't have a video of a man landing on the moon, probably not too many people would believe that. So if we're unable to make things transparent, or we don't have really credible way of proving it, then we tend simply not to trust it or believe it. And also, we have a natural tendency to distrust things that we don't fully understand. New technologies, but also foreign cultures. Historically, that's even the largest. And also complexity. The more complexity, the less there is trust. So I chose those examples because all of them resonate with what research shows is most significantly impacting the outcomes of trust. Reliability, fairness, and transparency, they have by far the biggest impact on trust. So there's a lot of different research and studies, but I personally really like the OECD Trust Survey. Latest 2024 recently came out, and why I like it is because a lot of what we're talking about, it shows up very specifically on that radar. So there's a couple of really interesting things what to absorb from that survey. So first, absolutely, the largest impact on trust is satisfaction with outcomes. Just putting easy to find information on a government website, however pretty it is, it doesn't move the needle. But what does move the needle, what does significantly improve trust, is solving a problem. For example, applying for a driver's license and then this license actually showing up in your mailbox, meaning creating an outcome, that has a huge impact. What else is interesting? People care a lot about legitimate use of personal data, which is funny because we are so willing to give that away to social media. Why? Because we have emotional satisfaction with the service. So we're willing to trade our data privacy for valuable service outcomes. Also, people care a lot about equal treatment and anybody not having an unfair advantage. And then there's execution, executing things in a way that the public approves on. More on that later. Now, all of that combined, what does it imply? What's the general formula that we think that is mostly significant for improving trust? We think it's something like this. Reliability, fairness, transparency as the core components, and then execution. You take away reliability, it almost zeroes out everything else. You take away fairness or transparency, same. It almost zeroes out everything else. And with execution, you can make things better or worse, but fundamentally, if you don't have reliability, you don't have fairness in the system, you don't have transparency, execution, however good or bad, it doesn't really move the needle that much. So practical experiences now that considering this, what are some of the practical things that can be done to move those indicators? Let's start with reliability. It's the service experience that matters. Not really, it doesn't need to be that flashy or anything, but it needs to be super simple. That's the core of it. It has to be crazy simple. So in Estonia, we even created a service design policy that everything from the government should be accessible within 3 moves of thumb. Want to get a new driving license, pay taxes, get married, really? Or perhaps even see if your kid was in the school today in a math class or somewhere else. Well, there you go. 3 moves of thumb, you see it. You get the outcome immediately. Not wait 3 days. 1, 2, 3, done. So, and moving to a modern service delivery channel, and affordable service delivery channel. So government has to provide service where the people are. And people are mobile. In fact, today it's so affordable that there are several governments that are considering diverting costs from social workers and front offices by providing certain social groups with prepaid mobile phones to offer better accessibility for the people that are in need, for example, disabled people. And the complexity in this is about creating a system where we can actually create higher maturity level public services. And that requires certain digital public infrastructure and also certain policies. For example, the famous once-only principle. So the once-only principle, this is actually one of the, let's say, core foundational roles what we have created in Estonia to drive our public services. The basic principle behind this is that government should ask your information once, and then it's their problem to circulate that information between themselves. For example, a tax authority cannot ask where I live. It's completely under the jurisdiction of another government authority who is owning a different register where that is, and if they want to know, they ask it from there. That's the essence of it, to connect the government together, make it seem as a whole, and then we're capable of creating significantly higher maturity level services. And that doesn't require some sort of radical transformation. We didn't transform or pivot our government or create that as a linear format of some sort of big government transformation. That happened over the time, progressively. Small improvements to existing services. And only over the time, they become something that might look like this. Next, fairness. It can be argued that if you want to make something less discriminating, take the human out of it. Discrimination is a human condition. Algorithms do not discriminate unless we make them. So to increase the perception of fairness, the recommendation is to automate or prioritize automation in places where there is a high risk that human might do a biased decision. For example, auditing the wrong person, or somebody famous or rich cutting the line. These are these places where unintentionally it's so easy to become biased even if we don't want to. So, but to do that, obviously we need to utilize data for automation. But the trick there is that we need very clear rules who can do what with our data. How are the algorithms making decisions and making those algorithms transparent? So regulations can be complex, but the interpretation of those regulations must be so super simple, singular, and clear that you don't need a lawyer to explain them to you. It can be. I think that the answer to a citizen, what are the rights and obligations, cannot be that they need a lawyer to tell them to. It needs to be so simple. And just as a side note, here is a depiction of what is the policy or a regulative framework in a nutshell what we have in Estonia in relation to European Union. Why I'm pointing it out is because the relationship between the Estonian regulation and the European Union is a very similar dynamic what happens in federations. So fundamentally, just 3 things that are being regulated. Just 3 things. Who can do what with citizen data? What are the rights and obligations related to that data? How is the government using that data? then how do we assure that this data is utilized in the correct way, and how do we assure security of it? And then it's to regulate actions in a digital world to have the same meaning as in a physical world. So digital government is just government. It's not some other entity. That means that, for example, handwritten signature and digital signature must have the same legal meaning. So these are the fundamental principles. And what's important is that we're capable of simplifying those extremely complex topics so that policy people, technical people, lawyers, and everybody else are capable of talking about the same things in a very similar terminology that needs to be understandable to everybody, both to experts and also to the citizen. And then we have transparency. We can create the best of the government, but if we're unable to prove to the citizen that what we're doing is legitimate, good luck. So it's hard to trust without proof. So in Estonia, we had a very low trust society in the early 90s when the Soviet occupation ended. And we created a system where there is a lot of transparency related to how the government is utilizing citizen data, fundamentally. So we have a system in place where anybody who, like if a government worker, for example, for me, accesses my data in real time, I can see that this event took place. If I have questions why it happened, I can start the process to ask questions why it happened. So citizens, fundamentally, they own their data. Public sector can use that data according to legislation, which is super clear about it. And citizen can check to assure that what the government is doing is legitimate. So that creates like a circle of trust. So honestly, often this is what we consider is the like the secret sauce of the Estonian digital government. That transparency is what creates trust for the entire system. And we have in Europe one very strict data protection regulation, GDPR. GDPR is quite strict about data utilization. So when that came, then a lot of governments thought that, okay, how do we continue? And then there are other governments who thought that, okay, this is actually setting clear rules, and now it's simply us to prove that we're doing it the right way. This is how we are trying to do it the right way. And then we have execution. This goes back to the very beginning, that trust is easier to destroy than create. And our key experience from this comes from the asymmetric nature of trust. So constant small improvements have better impact on trust than rare, large, high-impact reforms. The small things. So it's important that citizens see the constant improvement. So in Estonian government, this has even been baked into the public procurement mechanisms. So everything large needs to be decomposed into a smaller, in Estonia it's actually 500,000 euro chunks. So, and then create a multi-vendor environment where the companies have to constantly compete for those smaller chunks. So this has worked wonders. So it has created a cost efficiency, de-risked large-scale program implementations, and actually pushes all the parties constantly to innovate due to the competition. So we believe that something must be driving innovation. Innovation just doesn't happen by itself. It's either a crisis or it's competition, but something must be driving innovation. This sort of system creates competition between vendors to innovate. So constant small improvements are significantly more important for trust than radical, rare reforms that are hard to implement. And if you think about it, that's really common sense. It's really common sense. Just something from a much more practical life. Think about it. You could argue that a breakfast every day is much more important than a large birthday gift once a year. Thank you. This was some of our experience.
Andres, that was amazing. I want you to know there are lots of comments in the chat. We've talked a lot about Estonia. I joked about it this morning. But there was a comment, finally, you're explaining, sort of what has happened there. And it's just really powerful to hear your sort of the fundamentals, that you're operating in a low-trust society, but it's the work that you've done to just deliver that is building that trust, at least with the services and the infrastructure. So thank you. Here we are, finally, Estonia explained. So we do have some, well, actually lots of questions coming in. But one of the big ones, and this is on my mind as an American who is calming her anxiety today about what's happening down south. But there's a question just about social media and how that is really basically undermining trust in any and all institutions today and in government. So is there a roadmap, or how are you addressing that in Estonia?
Social media, that's a difficult one. Honestly, I haven't seen a single very good way how to tackle that in the world. Still as of yet. So misinformation, disinformation, everything related to it. I don't think that there is a single very good mechanism in the world that is properly tackling this problem as of yet. That's something that I would say we still, all of us, need to learn how to tackle. Yeah. Especially considering the entirely new security environment that we all live in.
Mm-hmm. So there's social media. There are also all of these social platforms, goods and services. You mentioned that essentially people are willing to trade valuable information, private information, personal data for outcomes. Is it truly that people are willing to trade data privacy for valuable outcomes all the time, or that sometimes there's no other option?
I mean, research does point that there is a very clear incentive motivation that if you're able to provide higher value outcome, you are willing to give away more. The question sometimes is that I do believe that sometimes we need to protect the people from themselves. That Europe's answer to almost everything is, please do not quote me on that, but is regulation. Yeah. Europe's answer to everything seems to be that, okay, that let's regulate something, let's protect the people. So the question is where to strike the balance, where to give people enough room that they're able to make their own decisions, but at the same time, we're assuring that very stupid things don't happen. We need to protect the children, we need to protect the people that cannot protect themselves and so forth. I think that these are the things that we do have to regulate, but not enough. And where is that balance? That's a very tricky question. I think that this naturally societies will find that balance.
Mm-hmm. So how do you align sharing personal information between government departments with data privacy requirements? There's data collected for an express purpose. Are you not sharing, not disseminating? Or sort of a similar question to Natalie earlier about data silos. How are you sharing that personal information? How is that set up, and how is that powering your services?
So fundamentally, that works as a system of registries. So what's important, it's the first step of digital transformation for the governments typically is to get rid of documents. What you need is data, not documents. And what's important is that the fundamentally different organizations have very clear rules and regulations who is owner of what specific data. So for example, who is owning the data of healthcare? And then if we're capable of clarifying that and making also sure that those rules are very clear, then it's also possible to start creating a system how to share that data between different parts of the government, but also with the private sector, based on very clear rules. But first, that clarity needs to be there. But also, that is also a gradual process. This doesn't require reinventing the entire government, but actually very small improvements. on clarity. And also, clarity doesn't always mean regulation. It also can mean simply communication, better communication.
That's right. Well, I love that. That's a great place to end because you sort of ended your talk with that. Start small and think about how you move from there. Thank you so much, Andres. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.